Hello, boring dreamers. Today, we are stripping away the comfort of the light switch and plunging ourselves into a world where the setting sun doesn't just mark the end of the working day. It marks the end of the visible world. We are traveling back to the Middle Ages, not for the jousts or the feasting, but to experience the 12 hours of terror, boredom, and anxiety that happen after the candles blow out. You see the movies where castles are lit by thousands of blazing torches. But let's be honest, you probably won't survive the reality, which is a darkness so complete, it feels like being buried alive. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, go ahead and let me know in the comments where you're rewatching from, and what time it is there. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are standing in the middle of a narrow, twisting street in a bustling medieval town, perhaps London, Paris, or Cologne somewhere around the year 1350. The ground beneath your feet is uneven, a mixture of hard-packed earth and slick cobblestones that feel treacherous even in the daylight. But it is not day anymore. The sun is currently bleeding out over the horizon, casting long distorted shadows that stretch across the timber-framed houses leaning precariously over the street. The air is cooling rapidly, carrying the distinct sharp scent of wood smoke, damp wool, and the faint underlying metallic tang of a butcher's shop closing for the night. You watch as the last sliver of orange light vanishes behind a church spire, and for a moment, you wait for the streetlights to buzz to life. You wait for the ambient glow of the city to reflect off the clouds. You wait for the headlights of a passing car, but nothing happens. Instead, the world simply disappears. You have just encountered the first and most terrifying enemy of the medieval night, absolute, unadulterated blackness. In the modern world, we have effectively killed the night. We live in a perpetual twilight of LEDs, neon signs, and the blue light of our smartphones. We have forgotten what true darkness looks like. But here, without light pollution, the night is not a backdrop. It is a physical weight. It descends upon you like a heavy velvet curtain, thick and suffocating. You hold your hand up in front of your face, and you see nothing, literally nothing. It's a strange, disorienting sensation, like your eyes have suddenly stopped working. You blink, straining to catch a photon, but the only light comes from the stars above, which look impossibly bright and cold, piercing the black canopy like diamonds on a shroud. You take a tentative step forward and immediately stub your toe on a loose stone, sending a jolt of pain up your leg that makes you want to curse the darkness. You realize that without sight, your other senses are going into overdrive. The silence isn't empty. It's filled with the rustle of straw, the creak of timber settling in the cold, and the distant bark of a dog that sounds aggressive enough to be a wolf. You feel a sudden, profound vulnerability. You are a visual creature in a world that has just been rendered invisible. It's like playing a video game where the screen suddenly shuts off, but the game is still running, and the monsters can still see you. You might be thinking, why don't I just light a torch? Well, that brings us to a harsh economic reality. Light in the Middle Ages is a luxury status symbol, not a basic utility. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that beeswax candles, the ones that burn clean and smell nice, are incredibly expensive, reserved for the church and the nobility. If you want light, you are stuck with tallow candles made from rendered animal fat, usually sheep or cow. They sputter, they drip, and they smell suspiciously like a burning hamburger that has been left on the grill for 3 hours. And even those are too precious to waste on a casual stroll. Most people operate on a sun-up, sun-down schedule, simply because they cannot afford to extend the day. The sun is a free subscription service. The candle is pay-per-view. So you stand there in the ink-pot darkness, feeling the temperature drop. The cold seems to have a malicious intent here, seeping through your clothes. You wrap your arms around yourself, trying to remember which way the inn was. As you hesitate, you recall a quirky fringe historical belief that explains why the streets emptied so fast. The fear of night air. Medieval medical theory, heavily influenced by the idea of miasma, held that the air changed quality at night. It became heavy, vaporous, and potentially poisonous. People believed that if you breathed in the damp night air, it would upset the balance of your humors, leading to fevers, madness, or death. So, shutters are slammed tight, not just to keep out thieves, but to keep out the atmosphere itself. You are standing in a toxic fog, according to the locals. You fumble for the wall of the nearest house to guide you, your fingers brushing against rough wattle and daub. The texture is gritty and damp. You are essentially navigating by braille now. This darkness changes the psychology of the space. During the day, this street was a public avenue of commerce and community. Now it is a lawless void. Historians still argue about the extent to which medieval people actually feared the night itself versus the practical dangers within it. Some, like Roger Eckerch, suggest that the pre-industrial night was a time of misrule, where the social order broke down and chaos reigned. Others argue that for the tired peasant, the dark was a welcome friend, a blanket of rest. Standing here, unable to see a foot in front of you, you are definitely leaning toward the chaos and terror side of the debate. You hear footsteps approaching. They are soft, deliberate, and coming from ahead of you. You stop breathing. You can't see who it is. Is it a fellow traveler lost in the void? Is it a guard? Or is it someone who thrives in this environment? A predator who doesn't need light to find a victim? The footsteps stop. You feel a presence, a displacement of air, just a few feet away. The hair on the back of your arms stands up. In the modern world, if you hear a noise, you whip out your phone and use the flashlight. Here, you are defenseless. You are forced to wait, heart hammering against your ribs, for the darkness to reveal its secrets. Suddenly, a faint, flickering light appears around a corner further down the street. It's a lantern, swinging rhythmically. It casts long, dancing shadows that make the buildings look like they are breathing. The light doesn't illuminate much, just a small pool of yellow on the mud, but it is enough to break the paralysis. You move toward it, drawn like a moth to a flame, desperate for any visual input that isn't just black. As you get closer to the light, you realize that the medieval night isn't just passive darkness. It is an active force that reshapes the city. The darkness hides the filth, the danger, and the reality of the streets, but it also amplifies the imagination. Every shadow holds a demon. Every creak is a ghost. You are tired, cold, and effectively blind. And just as you think you might find some safety near the lantern, a loud, resonant sound booms across the rooftops, shaking the silence. It is a metallic clang, harsh and authoritative. Clang, clang, clang. It is the sound of authority asserting itself over the void. The darkness might be absolute, but the city has one final mechanism to try and control it. You have survived the sunset, but now you have to survive the lockdown. The bell is tolling, and it is telling you that if you are not in... The sound of the bell isn't a gentle suggestion. It's a command that vibrates in your chest. Clang, clang, clang. It echoes off the stone walls of the cathedral and bounces through the narrow alleys. A relentless acoustic pulse designed to reach every ear in the city. This is the curfew bell. The word curfew actually comes from the old French phrase couvre-feu, which literally means cover fire. In a world built entirely of wood and straw, leaving a fire burning unattended while you slept was an act of suicidal negligence. So the bell is telling you two things: put out your lights and get off the streets. You watch as the last few stragglers on the road pick up their pace, scurrying like cockroaches when the kitchen light turns on. Shutters slam shut with definitive thuds. Bolts slide into place with heavy metallic clunks. The city is sealing itself up tight. You realize with a start that being outside after the bell stops ringing isn't just socially awkward. It is illegal. In many medieval cities, being found wandering the streets after curfew without a legitimate reason, like being a midwife or a doctor, could land you in the stocks or a damp cell for the night. You are essentially a trespasser in your own town. You start to run, or at least shuffle jog as fast as you can without breaking an ankle on the uneven cobblestones. You are heading toward the city gates. Most medieval towns are walled fortresses, concentric circles of stone designed to keep armies out and citizens in. At night, these walls become a prison. The massive wooden gates, reinforced with iron bands, are groaning on their hinges. You see the gatekeeper, a burly man with a lantern and a distinct lack of patience, pushing against the heavy timber. He is closing the seal. If you are outside the walls when that gate shuts, you are stuck in the suburbs, which, in the medieval context, isn't a nice neighborhood with manicured lawns, but a lawless shantytown of brothels, tanneries, and leper colonies. You squeeze through the gap just as timbers slam together with a sound like a thunderclap. A heavy iron bar drops into place. Thud. You are inside, safe. Well, safer than outside, but now you are trapped in a pressure cooker. The city at night is a densely packed hive of humanity, animals, and anxiety. The curfew doesn't just stop movement. It stops noise. Laws in cities like London and Paris explicitly forbade night walking and making unreasonable noise after dark. No singing, no shouting, no hammering. The city is forced into an artificial silence, a hush that feels tense and expectant. A mainstream historical fact that might surprise you is that the gatekeepers were often some of the most corrupt officials in the city. If you arrived 5 minutes late, a few silver coins slipped through a viewing slot could miraculously cause the impassable gate to open just wide enough for you to squeeze through. But if you were poor, you slept in the ditch with the rats. The curfew was a tax on tardiness, and business was booming. As you catch your breath, leaning against the cold stone of a merchant's house, you notice chains being drawn across the ends of the streets. Yes, chains. In some cities, like Paris, the authorities didn't just lock the outer gates. They locked the internal streets too. Heavy iron chains were stretched across intersections to prevent anyone, specifically mobs or invading cavalry, from moving freely through the town. You are literally being penned in. It feels less like a neighborhood and more like a cattle stockyard. The darkness inside the walls is even deeper than outside because the overhanging upper stories of the houses block out the starlight. You are in a canyon of timber and plaster. The only light comes from the cracks in the shutters where people are defying the cover fire rule to finish a bit of work or read a prayer. These tiny slivers of orange light are the only proof that humanity still exists. You feel a strange sense of isolation. You are surrounded by thousands of people, separated from you by only a few inches of wood, yet you are completely alone. You decide to make your way toward your lodgings, moving slowly through the labyrinth. You recall a quirky fringe tidbit about the law of the lantern. In some German cities, if you had to be out after curfew, you were legally required to carry a light. Walking in the dark was, in itself, proof of criminal intent. Why would an honest man hide his face? By stumbling around in the pitch black, you are effectively broadcasting, "I am up to no good." You wish you had grabbed that lantern earlier. Historians still argue about the effectiveness of these curfews. While the laws were strict on paper, court records show endless lists of people fined for breaking them. Students sneaking out for wine, lovers meeting in secret, and servants running errands. It suggests that the medieval night was actually quite busy, a secret parallel society operating under the nose of the watch. But for you, the uninitiated time traveler, the risk feels too high. You stick to the shadows, trying to look invisible. As you creep along, You hear a sound from above, a creak of a hinge, a shutter opening. You look up, squinting into the gloom. You see a figure leaning out of a second-story window. They are holding a bucket. Your modern brain, conditioned by sanitation departments and indoor plumbing, doesn't immediately register the danger. You think, maybe they're watering a window box? But then you remember the layout of a medieval house. The bedroom is upstairs. The bathroom is a pot under the bed. And when the pot is full, gravity is the easiest way to empty it. The figure tips the bucket. Guard is low. Watch out for the water. A voice cries out, though the warning usually comes after the liquid has already left the precipice. You scramble backward, pressing yourself flat against the wall. A cascade of liquid slams into the cobblestones, exactly where you were standing a second ago. It splashes violently, spraying your boots with a substance that is definitely not water. The smell hits you instantly pungent, ammoniac, and undeniably human. You have just narrowly avoided the medieval night shower. You realize that the curfew bell didn't just signal the end of the day. It signaled the beginning of the waste disposal. You recoil from the approaching lantern light of the watch, pressing yourself deep into the shadows of a narrow side alley. You hold your breath, praying that the guard's vision is as limited as yours, and that he doesn't spot the steam rising from your freshly splashed boots. The heavy footsteps crunch past the alley entrance, pausing for a heart-stopping moment before continuing down the main thoroughfare. You exhale, your breath misting in the cold air. You have successfully evaded authority for the moment, but in doing so, you have stepped right into a geological layer of pure nightmare. You look down, or rather, you try to gauge what is happening around your ankles by the sensation alone. You are standing in the kennel. In medieval urban planning, this is the open drain that runs down the center, or sometimes the sides of the street. It is the primitive ancestor of the sewer, designed to carry away rainwater. But since rain is the only thing that flushes it, and it hasn't rained in a few days, the kennel is currently a stagnant, gelatinous trench filled with a substance the locals politely call muck. You try to lift your foot, and it makes a loud, wet-sucking sound, sherlock. The mud here is adhesive. It is a potent mixture of mud, animal dung, rotting straw from floor coverings, discarded food scraps, and the contents of those chamber pots we discussed earlier. You are literally standing in the waste products of the entire neighborhood. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that in cities like London, the street level rose significantly over the centuries, simply because people couldn't be bothered to haul the trash away. They just walked on top of it until it packed down. You are standing on history, but history smells like ammonia and rotten cabbage. You take a tentative step deeper into the alley, trying to find solid ground, but the cobblestones, if there are any, are buried under inches of this slurry. You slide dangerously, your arms windmilling to keep your balance. You realize now why medieval footwear often looks so peculiar. Fashionable people in this era would wear patent wooden soles raised on iron rings or blocks, strapped over their expensive leather shoes. They were essentially platform lifts designed to keep your feet above the tide of filth. You, unfortunately, are wearing your flat modern sneakers or soft boots. You are making direct contact. The muck is seeping through the eyelets. It's cold, wet, and teeming with bacteria that haven't been named yet. As you navigate this sludge, you hear a low, guttural grunting sound from a pile of refuse nearby. You freeze. Is it a wild boar? A demon? No, it's a pig. But not just any pig. This is a semi-feral urban pig, likely belonging to the Order of St. Anthony. A quirky historical tidbit is that while most livestock was banned from roaming the streets freely, the pigs of St. Anthony's Hospital were given a free pass to wander London and Paris, acting as living garbage disposals. They wore little bells around their necks to identify them. This one, however, is silent, massive, and currently eating something you really don't want to identify. It looks at you with beady, intelligent eyes, challenging you for the right of way. In the hierarchy of the night, the 300-pound pig outranks you. You step aside, sinking deeper into the ooze. You might be wondering, didn't they have laws against this? Historians still argue about the actual cleanliness of the medieval city. For a long time, the Victorian view was that medieval people were universally filthy and lived in squalor. However, modern scholars point to endless court rolls and muckraker fines that show authorities were obsessed with hygiene. There were strict rules. You had to clean the pavement in front of your house. You couldn't throw guts in the river. And you had to cart your dung away. The existence of the laws proves they cared about clean streets. But the sheer volume of fines suggests that night after night, the citizens ignored those laws completely. The reality is likely a mix. A city that desperately wanted to be clean, but was overwhelmed by the biological output of its own population. You continue your trudge, the smell becoming a physical weight in your lungs. It's a miasma of decay. You try to breathe through your mouth, but you can almost taste the air. It's thick and gray. You remember that night air fear again. Standing here, ankle deep in sludge, surrounded by the fumes of 1,000 chamber pots, you start to think the medieval doctors were right. This air does feel poisonous. It feels like it's coating your throat in a film of sickness. You spot a slightly higher patch of ground near a doorway and scramble onto it, scraping the worst of the muck off your soles against the stone. You are shivering now, the dampness from the street wicking up your pant legs. You look up at the slice of sky between the roofs. It's still pitch black. You have hours to go before dawn. Suddenly, a door opens just a crack a few feet away. A hand emerges, holding a bundle of rags. The hand tosses the bundle into the street, where it lands with a wet plat in the kennel. The door shuts immediately. You stare at the bundle. It moves. It's crawling with rats. The vermin population of the night is active. Rats, the vectors of the plague, are scurrying over the mounds of trash, their eyes reflecting the faint starlight. They are the true citizens of the curfew. You are just a visitor. You realize that the romantic cobblestone streets of fantasy novels are a lie. The reality is a biohazard zone. Every step is a gamble with infection. If you have a cut on your ankle or a blister on your heel, the water in this gutter could kill you just as surely as a sword. You pull your cloak or jacket tighter, trying to protect yourself from the splatter. You decide you need to get back to the main street. The alley is a dead end of filth. You creep back toward the entrance, checking for the lantern light. It's gone. The coast seems clear. You step out of the alley, your feet heavy with mud, looking like a swamp creature. You have survived the night shower from above and the slurry from below. You are covered in the city's waste. You feel degraded, dirty, and cold. But as you step onto the relatively firmer ground of the main road, thinking you've mastered the art of walking in the dark, you hear a voice. It's not the distant shout of a gatekeeper. It's close. It's right behind you. Stand fast, rogue. You spin around. You didn't hear footsteps. You freeze in the harsh yellow glare of the lantern, your heart doing that frantic, fluttering thing against your ribs. You put your hands up slowly, palms open, trying to look as non-threatening as possible for a person covered in street slime and creeping around in the pitch black. The figure behind the light lowers the billhook slightly, but the hooked blade a terrifying piece of agricultural equipment, modified for tearing people off horses' stays, pointed at your chest. You squint against the light, trying to make out the face of the law. What you see isn't exactly a gleaming knight in shining armor. The man standing before you is wearing a stained, padded jacket known as a gambeson, which looks like a heavy quilt that has seen too many tavern fights. On his head is a dented iron skullcap, or kettle hat, sitting slightly askew. He smells of stale ale, onions, and wet wool. This is the Night Watch, and while he technically represents the king's peace, right now he looks a lot more like a mugger with a badge. In the modern world, we are used to professional police forces officers who are trained, paid, and, ideally, held to a code of conduct. In the medieval city, policing is a do-it-yourself affair. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that the Night Watch was largely made up of regular citizens. Under laws like the Statute of Winchester in England, every male householder was required to take turns standing guard at the gates or patrolling the streets. This means the guy pointing a spear at you isn't a career cop. He's probably a baker or a cobbler who is incredibly annoyed that it's his turn to stay up all night in the freezing cold instead of sleeping in his warm bed. And grumpy people with spears are dangerous people. "Who goes there?" he grunts, stepping closer. "Identify yourself, or by St. George, I'll open you up to see if you're hiding stolen silver in your gut." You stammer something unintelligible. You don't have papers. You don't have a lantern. A crime. You are breaking curfew. A crime. And you look like a vagrant. A crime. In the eyes of medieval law, you are a walking felony. He circles you, the lantern swinging. He checks your belt. He checks your boots, grimacing at the muck. This is the moment where the protection part of his job description gets a little blurry. You see, since watchmen were often unpaid conscripts, or poorly paid substitutes, hired by wealthy merchants who didn't want to do the shift themselves, corruption wasn't a bug in the system. It was a feature. They were notoriously susceptible to bribery. In fact, a common fringe tidbit from medieval court records reveals that watchmen were frequently charged with being accomplices to the very crimes they were, supposed to stop acting as lookouts for burglary gangs or shaking down innocent travelers for drink money. The guard leans in close, the onion smell intensifying. "You have the look of a night walker," he whispers, "a disturber of the peace. The fine for such villainy is a night in the Tun." The Tun was a notorious prison in London for night walkers. Essentially, a round stone holding cell that was damp, dark, and full of rats. He lets the threat hang in the air. Then, he rubs his thumb against his fingers in a universal gesture. He doesn't want to do paperwork. He wants a payout. You realize this is a shakedown. If you don't pay up, you go to jail. If you do pay up, you're just a victim of armed robbery sanctioned by the state. You fumble in your pockets. If you have a few coins, you hand them over. If not, maybe you offer a ring or a brooch. He snatches the offering with practiced speed, tucking it into his belt. The billhook lowers completely. "Be off with you," he mutters, waving you away. "And if I see you again, the price doubles." You scramble away, heart pounding, feeling a mix of relief and indignation. You've just been extorted by the police. But as you put distance between yourself and the lantern, you have to consider the alternative. If you had run, he could have raised the hue and cry. This was a legal obligation, where the watchman shouts, "Stop, thief!" And every citizen within earshot is legally required to drop what they are doing, grab a weapon, and chase you. Imagine an entire neighborhood of angry, sleep-deprived people with axes hunting you down. Paying the bribe was definitely the smarter move. Historians still argue about the effectiveness of this amateur policing system. Some scholars, like Elaine Clark, argue that the system worked surprisingly well because it relied on local knowledge. Everyone knew everyone, so strangers stood out instantly, and community pressure kept crime in check. Others argue that the Night Watch was a joke, a collection of impotent and ancient men, to quote Shakespeare's depiction of Dogberry, who spent more time sleeping or drinking than catching criminals. Walking away from your encounter, significantly poorer but alive, you feel the system is plenty effective, at least at extracting revenue. You turn a corner, leaving the main thoroughfare behind. You need to get off the open street. The watchman has given you a pass for now, but his shift changes, or his mood might change. You need to find a place to lay low. But the deeper you go into the residential quarters, the darker it gets. The houses here are packed tight, their upper stories almost touching across the narrow alley. It feels like walking through a tunnel. You notice something unnerving as you feel your way along the wall. The timber beams of the houses are dry, very dry, and the roofs are thatched with straw. The entire city is essentially a pile of kindling arranged in the shape of buildings. You remember the curfew bell? Cover fire. It makes sense. But then you realize you need light. You can't keep navigating by touch in a city filled with filth and open drains. You reach into your pocket and find a small stump of a tallow candle you managed to acquire, perhaps from the inn before you got locked out. You have a flint and steel, or maybe you find a smoldering ember in a discarded brazier. You strike a spark. The wick catches. A small trembling flame bursts to life. The relief is instant. You can see. You can see the puddles of sludge before you step in them. You can see the rats scurrying away. But as you hold that tiny flame up to the wood, you cup your hand around the trembling flame of the tallow candle, shielding it from the biting wind that whistles down the alley. The light is pitifully small, a fragile orange sphere in a universe of crushing black, but it changes everything. Suddenly, the world isn't just sounds and smells. It has form again. You can see the slick, wet stones of the street, the rotting timber of the door frames, and the terrified scuttle of a rat vanish into a drain. But as you hold this light up, grateful for the visibility, you also notice the smell. It's not the clean, waxy scent of a vanilla candle from a modern home goods store. It is the heavy, meaty stench of rendered animal fat. Tallow candles are made from the suet of sheep or cows, and burning them smells remarkably like frying a hamburger that has gone slightly rancid. As the flame eats the wick, hot grease drips down onto your fingers, scalding your skin. You wince, almost dropping the candle. You fumble, catching it just in time, your heart leaping into your throat. And in that split second of panic, you realize the true weight of what you are carrying. You are not just holding a light source. You are holding the potential death of the entire city. Look closely at the wall you are standing next to. In the flickering light, you see the texture of the building material. It has wattle and daub woven lattice of wooden strips, wattle, plastered over with a mixture of mud, straw, and animal dung, daub. Above that, the timber frame is dry, seasoned oak. And above that, a roof made of dried reeds or straw thatch. The entire city of London, or Paris, or York, is essentially a massive dehydrated bonfire waiting for a spark. You are walking through a labyrinth of kindling. A mainstream historical fact that defines this era is the frequency and devastation of urban fires. Before the Great Fire of London in 1666, the city burned down partially or completely dozens of times. In 1135, a fire started on London Bridge and consumed most of the city. In 1212, another fire killed thousands. These weren't just accidents. They were inevitable statistical outcomes of building a high-density city out of wood and heating it with open flames. By walking around with an open candle in a strong wind, you are engaging in the most reckless behavior possible. You look up, and the danger becomes even more apparent due to the architecture. Medieval houses were built with jetties upper stories that project outward over the street to maximize floor space. In these narrow alleys, the jetties of opposing houses nearly touch. This creates a cozy tunnel effect, but for a fire, it's a highway. If a spark from your candle catches the thatch on your left, the flames won't just go up. They will jump across the narrow gap to the house on the right. The fire doesn't need to travel along the ground. It leaps from roof to roof, moving faster than a man can run. You feel a sudden gust of wind buffet the alley. The flame dances wildly, elongating and snapping. A spark detaches itself and floats into the dark, glowing like a malevolent firefly. You watch it with bated breath as it drifts toward a pile of dry straw near a stable door. It lands. It glows. You step forward, stomping it out with your muddy boot, your heart hammering a frantic rhythm against your ribs. That was close. Too close. The fear of fire is so ingrained in the medieval psyche that the punishment for arson is often a mirror of the crime itself. A quirky, fringe tidbit from legal history is that in some jurisdictions, arsonists were not just hanged. They were burned alive, sometimes inside the very building they set alight, or an especially constructed barrel filled with pitch. Even accidental fires were punished severely. If your house caught fire through negligence and threatened your neighbors, you could be fined your entire livelihood or banished from the city. The community had zero tolerance for fire safety violations because everyone knew that one person's mistake was everyone's funeral. Historians still argue about the effectiveness of the medieval building regulations that attempted to curb this danger. As early as the 12th century, cities passed laws demanding that cookshops be whitewashed to resist fire, and that roofs be covered in clay tiles instead of thatch. But walking through these poorer districts, you can see that the laws were often ignored due to cost. Tiles are expensive. Straw is free. The economic reality trumped the safety code, leaving the city in a perpetual state of vulnerability. You shield the candle again, moving faster now. You don't want to be the person who starts the great fire of insert current year. You pass a church, and outside, you see the city's primitive firefighting equipment hanging on the wall under a small shelter. It consists of leather buckets, and more terrifyingly, a fire hook. This is a massive iron hook on a long pole. It wasn't used to pull people out of burning buildings. It was used to pull the burning building down. If a house caught fire, the neighbors didn't try to save it, it was already gone. They would hook the beams and collapse the structure inward to create a fire break, sacrificing one home to save the block. It's a brutal, pragmatic approach to disaster management. Your hand is throbbing from the hot tallow, and the wind is getting stronger. You need to get indoors. Not just to escape the watch, not just to escape the cold, but to extinguish this terrifying little flame before it kills you. You spot a sign swinging above a doorway, a crude painting of a bush or a hoop, the universal symbol for an alehouse or an inn that offers lodging. You rush toward the door, pushing it open. The wind tries to follow you in, swirling the sawdust on the floor, but you slam the heavy timber shut behind you. The silence is sudden and profound. You are out of the wind. You crest the top of the ladder and pull yourself into the sleeping loft. The air up here is significantly warmer, trapping the heat rising from the hearth and the bodies below. It's thick, humid, and smells intensely of unwashed wool and old straw. Your eyes, now fully adjusted to the gloom, scan the room. In a modern hotel, you would expect a key card and a private sanctuary. Here, privacy is a concept as foreign as a smartphone. The room is dominated by what looks like a single, massive wooden frame, a great bed, that occupies nearly the entire floor space, and it is occupied. There are already 3 people in it. This is the reality of medieval lodging. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that solitary sleep was a rare luxury, reserved for the ultra-wealthy or the religious ascetics. For everyone else, sleeping was a communal activity. You slept with your family, your servants, your guests, and in a roadside inn like this, complete strangers. You are essentially about to join a cuddle puddle with a traveling wool merchant, a pilgrim who hasn't bathed since leaving Canterbury, and a mercenary who sleeps with a dagger under his pillow. You approach the bed cautiously. The mattress is not a memory foam wonder. It is a large linen sack stuffed with straw, chaff, or perhaps dry leaves, resting on a lattice of ropes. This is where the phrase "sleep tight" likely comes from. You had to tighten the ropes underneath to keep the mattress from sagging into a hammock shape. Right now, it looks lumpy and uneven. You find a sliver of space on the edge. Kick off your mud-caked boots, but keep your clothes on, because it's freezing and you don't trust your roommates, and slide in. The straw crunches loudly under your weight. It's hard, poking you through the linen. You try to get comfortable, shifting your hips to find a hollow in the packed vegetation. The traveler next to you grunts in his sleep and rolls over, throwing a heavy, hairy arm across your chest. You gently remove it, trying to maintain a polite social distance in an era that has never heard of the term. You stare up at the darkened rafters, listening to the chorus of snores, wheezes, and farts that fill the room. You tell yourself that at least you are warm. At least you are off the street. And then you feel it. A tickle. Just a light, ghostly sensation on your ankle. You twitch your leg, assuming it's a stray piece of straw poking through the fabric. But then you feel it again. On your wrist, on your neck. It's not a poke. It's a crawl. You freeze. The warmth of the bed, which felt so inviting a moment ago, suddenly takes on a sinister context. Warmth is biology. Warmth is an incubator. You are lying on a giant biological battery that has been charging all night, and now the residents are waking up to feed. You have entered the domain of Cimex lectularius, the common bedbug, and Pulex irritans, the human flea. In the medieval world, these aren't just pests. They are inevitable companions. There is no fumigation. There are no pesticides. Every time a new traveler lies down in this bed, they drop off a few hitchhikers and pick up a few new ones. The straw inside the mattress is a thriving metropolis of insect life. A quirky, fringe historical tidbit is that medieval housekeeping manuals often suggested bizarre remedies for this. One popular method involved placing a hollowed-out cucumber filled with blood on the bed to trap the bugs, or spreading a perimeter of fern leaves and gallons of water to drown them. Another text suggested that if you hung the foot of a badger at the head of the bed, the bugs would leave. Looking at the sheer number of bites you are starting to accumulate, you suspect the badger foot theory hasn't been peer-reviewed. A sharp, stinging pain hits your calf. That's a flea. Fleas are the sprinters of the parasite world, jumping, biting, and moving on. But then comes the deeper, slower itch. The bed bug. These creatures are stealthy. They inject a mild anesthetic when they bite, so you don't feel the initial puncture. You only feel the aftermath, the red, burning welt that forms minutes later. You realize with horror that the musty, sweet smell in the room, which you thought was just old coriander or damp wood, is actually the pheromone scent of a heavy bed bug infestation. You try to lie still, hoping that if you don't move, they won't notice you. This is a flawed strategy. They track you by your body heat and the carbon dioxide you exhale. Every breath you take is a dinner bell. You feel something scuttling through your hair. You slap at it violently, sitting up. The movement wakes the merchant next to you. "Scratch, don't slap," he mutters sleepily, without opening his eyes. Slapping makes them angry. He rolls over and goes back to sleep, scratching his own arm with a rhythmic, subconscious motion. It seems the locals have developed a level of tolerance, or at least resignation, that you lack. Historians still argue about the psychological impact of this constant parasitism. Did medieval people simply get used to it, developing a kind of sensory callus where the itching didn't bother them? Or were they in a state of constant, low-level misery? You lie back down, defeated. You pull your collar up tight, trying to minimize the exposed skin. The scratching sound in the room is now audible to you. It's a background texture to the snoring snore, scritch-scratch, wheeze, scritch-scratch. It is the soundtrack of the Middle Ages. You realize that no one in this era ever truly sleeps alone. You are always part of the food chain. Your mind starts to race. Are these fleas carrying anything? The plague doesn't usually travel via bedbugs, but fleas are the primary vector for Yersinia pestis. You try to calculate the year. If it's 1348, you should probably get up and run. If it's 1350, you might have missed the first wave, but the great mortality is always lurking. Every bite feels like a game of Russian roulette. But exhaustion is a powerful drug. Despite the itching, despite the fear, despite the stranger's elbow in your ribs, your body begins to shut down. The adrenaline of the street chase fades, leaving you heavy and leaden. The sounds of the room blur together. The darkness behind your eyelids grows deeper. You drift into a fitful, shallow doze, your hand occasionally twitching to scratch a phantom itch. You think you are down for the count, ready to sleep through till dawn. But you are wrong. The medieval night has a different rhythm than the modern one. You wake up with a jolt. Your eyes snap open, staring into a darkness so absolute it feels heavy, like a physical weight pressing against your retinas. Your heart gives a confused thump. You lie there, waiting for the grogginess to hit, waiting for the urge to roll over and hit the snooze button on an alarm clock that won't be invented for another 500 years. But the grogginess doesn't come. In fact, you feel incredibly, uncomfortably awake. Your mind is sharp, your body feels rested, and your bladder is full. You try to gauge the time. Is it morning? You listen for the rooster, the church bells, the sounds of the market. Nothing. Just the wind whistling through the thatch and the rhythmic breathing of your bedmates. It must be the middle of the night. You panic slightly. In your modern life, waking up at 2 a.m. completely alert is a sign of insomnia, anxiety, or too much blue light before bed. You prepare yourself for hours of tossing and turning, staring at the ceiling, doing the math on how much sleep you're losing. But then, you hear a rustle. The wool merchant next to you sits up. He doesn't groan or curse the darkness. He stretches, yawns loudly, and reaches for a small cup of water on the floor. Across the room, you hear the mercenary striking a flint to light a small rushlight. You hear a murmur of conversation from the corner, a hushed, intimate whisper between a husband and wife. You are confused. Why is everyone awake? Is there a fire? An attack? No, you have simply entered the watch. You have just experienced the end of the first sleep, or primo somno. A mainstream historical fact that has only recently been rediscovered by historians like Roger Eckertz is that, for most of human history, we did not sleep in one consolidated 8-hour block. Instead, pre-industrial people slept in two distinct phases. They would go to bed shortly after dusk, around 9 o'clock or 10 p.m., sleep for about 4 hours the dead sleep, and then wake up naturally around midnight or 1 a.m. They would stay awake for an hour or two, and then go back to sleep for the second sleep or morning sleep until dawn. You are the only one in the room who thinks this is weird. To everyone else, this is as natural as eating lunch. This midnight interlude isn't a disorder. It's a scheduled break. It is a time of profound quiet and intimacy that the modern world has entirely erased with electricity. So, what do you do now? You can't scroll through Instagram. You can't turn on the TV. You are stuck in a room with 3 strangers and a lot of straw. You watch as the merchant pulls out a string of prayer beads. For many, this waking period is a spiritual prime time. The mind is clear, the world is silent, and it is believed that God is listening more closely in the stillness of the night. Monks, of course, have institutionalized this with matins, the midnight prayer service, but even lay people use this time to recite the little office of the Blessed Virgin, or simply contemplate their sins, of which you probably have a few after dodging the watch and stealing a wig. But it's not all prayer and piety. A quirky, fringe historical tidbit is that medieval medical texts and advice manuals specifically recommended this midnight gap as the optimal time for procreation. Physicians believed that after the first sleep, the body had finished digesting dinner, the humors were balanced, and the participants were rested enough vigorous encounters that would result in healthy male heirs. Consequently, the thin walls of medieval houses often echoed with the sounds of the watch being used for decidedly non-religious activities. You try to block out the sounds from the couple in the corner, realizing that privacy is just as scarce at 2 a.m. as it is at noon. You sit up, wrapping your cloak around your shivering shoulders. The room is cold, the fire has died down, but there is a strange, peaceful quality to the air. Without the pressure to fall back asleep immediately, you find your mind wandering. You think about the day. You watch the shadows dance from the mercenary's rushlight, a simple reed dipped in grease that burns with a smoky, dim light. He is sharpening his dagger, the rhythmic shishi of the whetstone adding a percussion track to the night. Historians still argue whether this segmented sleep pattern was purely biological, the natural rhythm of the human body when removed from artificial light, or if it was a cultural adaptation to the long, boring winter nights of Northern Europe. Experiments in the 1990s suggested that when modern people are deprived of artificial light for weeks, they naturally revert to this biphasic pattern. So, perhaps you aren't an insomniac. You're just finally living in your natural habitat. However, for you, the modern time traveler, the boredom is excruciating. You miss the stimulation. You miss the distraction. You are forced to sit with your own thoughts in the semi-darkness. And medieval thoughts can be dark. Without the distractions of the day, this is the time when anxieties creep in. You worry about the plague. You worry about the harvest. You worry about the state of your eternal soul. The darkness feels porous, as if the barrier between the physical world and the spiritual world has thinned. You notice the merchant has stopped praying and is now just staring into the gloom. He looks melancholy. This hour of wakefulness is often associated with a unique emotional state, a mix of clarity and dread. It is the time when plots are hatched, when poetry is composed, and when ghosts are seen. You feel a sudden kinship with these people. During the day, they are cogs in the feudal machine. But here, in the watch, they are just individuals staring into the void, wondering what it all means. After about an hour, a shift occurs. The conversation dies down. The rushlight is extinguished. The merchant lies back down, pulling the scratchy wool blanket up to his chin. A collective yawn seems to ripple through the room. The biological window is closing. The second sleep is calling. You settle back into the straw, the lumpy mattress feeling slightly more forgiving now that you are tired again. You close your eyes, and this time, the sleep that comes is different. It's not the heavy, exhaustion-fueled coma of the evening. It's lighter, filled with vivid narrative dreams. Medieval people placed huge significance on morning dreams, believing them to be prophetic, unlike the false dreams of the evening, which were caused by digestion. You drift off, hoping for a prophetic vision of a hot shower and a cheeseburger. But as your breathing slows and your muscles relax, you are entering the most vulnerable phase of the night. You are entering the realm of REM sleep, where the mind is active but the body is paralyzed. And in a world steeped in superstition, where the boundary between a nightmare and a demon is non-existent, this paralysis is not explained by neuroscience. It is explained by something sitting on your chest. You are about to meet the incubus. You are floating in the pleasant, hazy current of the second sleep. Your dreams are vivid, filled with the strange, symbolic imagery that medieval people loved to analyze. Perhaps a lion chasing a stag, or a king losing his crown. It feels peaceful. Your breathing is shallow. Your heart rate slow. You are deep in rapid eye movement, REM sleep, the phase where the brain is hyperactive, but the body is chemically paralyzed to keep you from physically acting out your dreams. In the modern world, this is a biological safety feature. In the medieval world, this paralysis is the open door for the entities of the dark. Suddenly, your eyes snap open. You are awake. You can see the faint outline of the rafters. You can hear the rhythmic snoring of the merchant next to you. You decide to roll over, to get comfortable again. You send the signal from your brain to your arm. Move. Nothing happens. You try to lift your head. It's glued to the pillow. You try to kick your leg. It's dead weight. A cold, sharp panic spikes in your chest. You are trapped inside your own body, a prisoner in a flesh cage. You try to open your mouth to scream, to wake the others to beg for help. But your jaw is locked, your throat constricted. All you can manage is a low, pathetic gurgle that is lost in the noise of the room. You are experiencing sleep paralysis, a phenomenon where the brain wakes up before the body's REM paralysis wears off. It's terrifying in 2024, but in 1350, it is proof that you are under spiritual assault. And then, you feel it. The temperature in the room seems to drop 10 degrees in a second. The shadows in the corner of the loft seem to coalesce, thickening into a shape that is darker than the surrounding blackness. It moves toward you. It isn't walking. It's gliding, hovering just above the straw. You want to close your eyes, to look away, but your eyelids are frozen open. You are forced to watch as the entity climbs onto the bed. You feel the mattress depress. You feel the weight settle onto your legs, then crawl slowly, agonizingly, up your body. It sits on your chest. It feels like an anvil made of ice. The air is squeezed out of your lungs. You can't breathe. You are suffocating under the pressure of a malevolent presence that is staring right into your soul. You have just met the Mara. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that the word nightmare comes directly from this experience. In Old English, a mare or mare was a specific type of malicious goblin or demon that sat on the chests of sleepers, suffocating them and inducing bad dreams. It wasn't just a bad dream in the abstract sense. It was a physical visitation. The night mare was the demon of the night. When you say, "I had a nightmare," you are unknowingly referencing a medieval demon that likes to ride humans like horses. The entity on your chest leans in close. You can smell it, a scent of sulfur, old earth, and something rotten. In the medieval mind, this isn't a hallucination caused by a glitch in your brainstem. It is the incubus. The incubus, from the Latin incubare, to lie upon, is a male demon who preys on sleeping women and sometimes men, though the female counterpart is the succubus. This isn't just a scary ghost story. It is a matter of serious theological debate and legal consequence. The Church teaches that demons are corporeal enough to interact with the physical world. They can move objects, they can cause illness, and yes, they can assault you in your bed. The fear is so palpable that you can feel your heart hammering against the weight on your ribs, trying to break free. You recall a quirky fringe tidbit about the supposed origins of the legendary wizard Merlin. According to medieval lore, Merlin was the product of a union between a human woman and an incubus. This story wasn't just a fantasy trope. It was a warning. It meant that these nocturnal visits could have lasting biological consequences. The fear of demon spawn was real enough that women could be put on trial if they gave birth to a child with deformities, accused of having consorted with a demon in the night. As the pressure on your chest intensifies, you desperately try to remember a prayer, a charm, anything. You look around the room with your peripheral vision, wishing you had taken precautions. Medieval people had an arsenal of apotropaic, evil-averting magic for exactly this moment. You wish you had hung a hag stone, a stone with a naturally occurring hole in it, over the bed. It was believed that looking through the hole revealed the true form of the demon and drove it away. Or perhaps an iron knife placed under the mattress. Demons, like the Fae, were terrified of cold iron. But you have nothing but a straw pillow and your own terror. The demon whispers something in a language that sounds like grinding stones. Your panic reaches a crescendo. You feel like you are dying. You are convinced that this is the end, that your soul is being squeezed out of your body like toothpaste from a tube. Historians and psychologists still argue about the prevalence of these accounts in the medieval period. Was there something in the environment, perhaps the ergot fungus on the rye bread, which causes hallucinations, that made sleep paralysis more common? Or was it purely psychological, a manifestation of the intense sexual repression and religious guilt of the era? When you are told from birth that demons are real and that your own sinful thoughts invite them, your brain is primed to interpret every shadow as a monster. Standing, or rather, lying at the intersection of biology and belief, the distinction doesn't matter much. The terror is absolute. Then, just as your lungs are about to burst, the spell breaks. A chemical switch flips in your brain. The paralysis dissolves. You gasp, inhaling a massive gulp of air that burns your throat. You lurch upward, throwing your arms out to push the weight off your chest. But there is nothing there. The shadow is gone. The merchant is still snoring. The rushlight is dark. You are alone in the bed, drenched in a cold sweat, your heart racing at 180 beats per minute. You touch your chest, half expecting to find bruises or claw marks. There is only your damp shirt. You sit there, trembling, clutching your knees. The rational part of your brain, the 21st century part, tells you it was just sleep paralysis. A glitch, a misfire. But the primal part of your brain, the part that has been soaking in the medieval atmosphere for 12 hours, isn't so sure. You feel watched. You feel marked. You try to lie back down, but your eyes refuse to close. Every time you drift off, you feel the shadow returning. The bed, once a refuge from the cold, has become a stage for trauma. You realize you cannot sleep here. You cannot risk the Mara returning. The second sleep is ruined. You look at the window. Through the cracks in the shutter, you see that it is still. You slip out of the communal bed, your movements agonizingly slow to avoid waking the merchant or the mercenary. You grab your boots and your cloak, tiptoeing across the creaking floorboards like a cartoon burglar. You climb down the ladder, heart in your throat, and ease the heavy timber door open just enough to squeeze through. The cold night air hits you like a slap in the face, instantly freezing the sweat on your skin. You are back in the black void of the street, but this time you have a destination. You aren't looking for a church or a guard post. You are looking for the only place in the medieval city that is still awake, the only place where the oppressive laws of the curfew don't apply. You are looking for a blind pig, a heckle hole, or simply an illicit alehouse. These are the speakeasies of the 14th century, hidden in cellars and back rooms, operating in direct defiance of the church and the crown. You remember the hushed directions you overheard earlier. Look for the red shutter near the tanner's yard. Knock 3 times. You navigate the muck-filled streets again, but this time the fear of the dark is replaced by the thrill of transgression. You find the building, a nondescript house that looks completely dark from the outside. But if you press your ear to the wall, you can hear it. A low thrum, a vibration, the sound of life. You find the cellar door, set low into the pavement, and knock. Thud, thud, thud. A slide opens. Eyes appraise you. You must look desperate enough, or perhaps dissolute enough, to pass, because the bolts slide back and the door opens. You descend a steep, slippery flight of stone steps and step into a sensory assault that rivels the day. The room is low-ceilinged, the beams black with soot. The air is thick with smoke, not just from the tallow candles stuck in bottles, but from clay pipes, if it were a few centuries later, or simply the roasting of meat on a spit in the corner. In a city where fresh meat is expensive and poaching is a hanging offense, the smell of roasting venison here is the smell of danger. It's crowded. Men and women are packed onto benches, drinking from leather tankards, shouting, laughing, and arguing. This is the underbelly of the medieval night. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that while alehouses were ubiquitous, operating one after curfew was a serious crime. The ale conners, officials whose job was to test the quality and price of beer, would fine landlords heavily for keeping disorderly hours. Yet, court records are full of them. Why? Because profit is a powerful motivator, and for the working class who labored from dawn to dusk, the night was the only time they had to be human beings. You squeeze onto a bench next to a man who looks like he might be a cutpurse or a poet. It is hard to tell the difference in this lighting. He shoves a tankard toward you. You drink. It's strong, dark ale, much more potent than the watery stuff you had earlier. It burns on the way down, fueling a sudden, reckless confidence. You look around. In the corner, an intense game is in progress. People are huddled around a table, watching small white objects clatter across the wood. Gambling. The church calls it the Book of the Devil. The king bans it because it distracts men from archery practice. But here, in the cellar, dice are the true religion. You walk over to watch. They are playing hazard, the complex, high-stakes ancestor of modern craps. The rules are a bewildering mix of mains and chances, involving probability calculations that would make a math professor sweat. You watch the dice tumble. They are made of bone or ivory, carved into rough cubes. A player throws a 7 and groans as the pile of silver coins is swept away by the caster. You feel the urge to join in. The adrenaline of the night, the fear of the demon in the bed, the near miss with the watch, it all culminates in a desire to test your luck. You fish out the few coins you have left, the ones the watchman didn't get, and slam them onto the table. I'm in, you say. The table goes quiet. They look at you, the stranger with the strange accent. Then someone grins. Fresh meat for the grinder. The grin seems to say they make room. As you play, you notice something odd about the dice. When the man opposite you throws, he seems to get a lot of 6s, suspiciously many. You recall a fringe historical tidbit that is absolutely fascinating. Medieval archaeologists have excavated dozens of dice that are loaded. They found dice drilled and filled with mercury or lead to weight them, and even dice with 2 6 faces and no 1 face. Cheating wasn't just common. It was an industry. There were terms for these tools. Bristles, dice with a hair stuck in them to alter the roll, and fulums, loaded dice. You are almost certainly being swindled by professionals. But you don't care. The atmosphere is intoxicating. For the first time all night, you aren't cold. You aren't lonely. You are part of a conspiracy. Historians still argue vigorously about the social role of these taverns. Traditionalists often viewed them as nurseries of vice and chapels of idolatry, citing the sermons of the time. But newer social historians argue that the alehouse was the parliament of the people. It was the only place where the strict social hierarchy dissolved. Here, a peasant could beat a merchant at dice. Here, political dissent was brewed alongside the beer. It was a space of resistance against the crushing order of the feudal world. Sitting here, watching a miller argue with a soldier, you feel the validity of that argument. This isn't just a bar. It's a sanctuary of freedom. However, freedom has a price. The game heats up. You manage to throw a lucky streak, defying the loaded dice purely by chance. The pile of silver in front of you grows. The mood at the table shifts. The grins disappear. The man with the scar across his nose is looking at your winnings, and then at the knife at his belt. You realize that the camaraderie of the tavern is fragile. It is held together by alcohol and the shared threat of the law. But underneath, these are desperate people in a desperate time. You have just won a week's wages in 10 minutes. In doing so, you have painted a target on your back. The man leans forward. Another throw, stranger? He hisses. Or are you a coward who runs with the coin? It's a trap. If you play, he'll cheat you until you're broke. If you leave, he might follow you. The allure of the tavern suddenly feels very claustrophobic. You look at the door, the steep stone steps leading up to the street. You look at the candle guttering in the bottle. The shadows seem to be stretching toward you again, not as demons this time, but as men with You sprint down the alleyway, your boots slipping on the slick, refuse-coated cobblestones. The alcohol from the tavern is still buzzing in your blood, but the adrenaline is sobering you up faster than a double shot of espresso. Behind you, the heavy, rhythmic thud of footsteps echoes off the narrow walls. Thud splash, thud splash. The man with the scar is coming, and he's not alone. You hear a whistle, a sharp, piercing sound that cuts through the silence of the curfew. It's a signal. He's calling for backup. You realize with a sinking feeling that you haven't just angered a sore loser. You have poked the hornet's nest of organized crime. In the modern imagination, we tend to think of medieval criminals as lone, desperate peasants stealing a loaf of bread. The reality is far more corporate. You have stumbled into the territory of a professional gang, perhaps something like the Coqs of London or the Coquillards of France. These aren't random muggers. They are syndicates with hierarchies, apprenticeships, and specialized roles. And right now, their role is predator, and yours is lunch. You turn a sharp corner, your shoulders scraping against the rough limestone of a building. You dive into the recess of a doorway, pressing yourself flat against the wood, trying to silence your jagged breathing. The footsteps slow down. They stop. You hear voices low, guttural slang that you can't quite parse. This is the cant, the secret language of the underworld, designed specifically to keep outsiders like you from understanding that they are currently discussing how to divide up your clothes. From your hiding spot, you watch a figure pass by the end of the alley. He moves with a terrifying, silent grace. He isn't carrying a heavy club. He's holding a small, curved knife. This is a cut purse. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that pockets weren't really a thing yet. Men and women carried their money and personal items in pouches suspended from their belts. The cut purse's job was to quietly slice the strings of the pouch in a crowd or in the dark and catch it before it hit the ground. It required the hands of a surgeon and the nerves of a bomb disposal expert. But if you catch them in the act, as you just did, the knife stops being a tool for cutting strings and starts being a tool for cutting throats. You wait until the footsteps fade, then peel yourself away from the door. You need to keep moving. The city, which felt like a maze earlier, now feels like a trap. Every shadow looks like an ambush. You recall a quirky fringe historical tidbit about the dangers of the medieval street. The tripwire. Thieves would sometimes stretch a rope across a dark street at ankle height. The victim would trip, sprawl into the muck, and before they could catch their breath, a gang would swarm them, strip them of valuables, and vanish. It was the medieval equivalent of a smash and grab, only with more mud and bruising. You start lifting your knees comically high as you walk, looking like a marching band member trying to be stealthy. As you creep along, you find yourself thinking about the sheer level of violence in this society. Historians still argue intensely about just how dangerous the medieval period actually was. Some, following the civilizing process theory of Norbert Elias, argue that medieval homicide rates were astronomical, perhaps 20 to 50 times higher than in modern Europe. They paint a picture of a society where impulsive violence was the norm, and settling an argument with a dagger was as common as sending a passive-aggressive email. Others argue that these numbers are skewed by unreliable records, and that tight-knit communities actually police themselves quite effectively. Standing here in the dark, wondering if the man with the scar is waiting around the next bend, you are definitely siding with the astronomical murder rate theory. You spot a large building looming ahead. It has stained glass windows, currently dark, and a heavy oak door with a massive iron ring handle. A church. A sudden spark of hope ignites in your chest. You remember the concept of sanctuary. In the Middle Ages, if a fugitive could reach a church and touch the knocker or enter the nave, they were legally untouchable. The king's law stopped at the church door. The pursuers could surround the building. They could starve you out, but they couldn't come in and drag you out without committing a mortal sin and facing excommunication. You make a break for it. You sprint across the small square, your eyes fixed on that iron ring. It's your finish line. You can almost feel the cold metal under your hand. But just as you reach the steps, a figure steps out from behind a gargoyle-adorned buttress. It's not the man with the scar. It's a woman. She's wearing a tattered veil and holding a heavy stick. She smiles, revealing a mouth full of blackened teeth. She isn't a nun. She's a lookout. She lets out a shriek that sounds like a banshee, alerting the entire neighborhood to your presence. The square suddenly feels very crowded. Shadows detach themselves from the walls. You realize that the church porch is a favorite sleeping spot for the homeless and the outcast, the very people the gangs recruit as eyes and ears. You bank hard to the left, abandoning the idea of sanctuary. You can't get to the door. You have to get out of the district entirely. You scramble up a pile of barrels stacked against a wall, hauling yourself onto a low roof. You are now playing medieval Assassin's Creed, but with zero parkour skills and a lot more fear. You scramble across the thatch, hoping it doesn't catch fire from the friction of your panic. From this vantage point, you can see the layout of the streets. You see the torches of the watch moving in the distance, and the darker, stealthier shapes of the gang moving below you. You are caught between the corrupt law and the ruthless lawless. You realize you cannot stay in the city. The walls, which were supposed to protect you, are now keeping you in a cage with the predators. You need to leave. You need to reach the gates. But the gates are locked, remember? The curfew bell sealed them shut hours ago. However, you recall that money talks. You still have the winnings from the tavern in your pocket, unless a cutpurse got them while you weren't looking your check. They're still there. There is often a postern gate, a small side door for pedestrians, or a corrupt guard at the main gate who can be bribed to look the other way for a car. Late arrival or an early departure, you slide down the other side of the roof, dropping into a pile of hay in a stable yard. You brush yourself off and head for the city wall. You find the gatehouse. Guard is dozing on a stool, a lantern by his feet. He wakes up as you approach, grabbing his spear. He looks grumpy, tired, and underpaid. You don't offer an excuse. You don't tell him about the gang. You just hold out a handful of silver coins, your hard-won gambling money. It's a bribe that represents probably 6 months. The heavy iron bolt of the city gate slams home behind you with a finality that echoes in your bones. You are now standing in the Liberties, the strip of land just outside the walls that is technically under city jurisdiction, but feels a world away from civilization. The smell of human waste and roasting meat is gone, replaced by the scent of damp earth, pine resin, and decaying leaves. The air is sharper here, cleaner and infinitely colder. You take a deep breath, thinking you've made a brilliant escape. You've traded the cutpurses for the countryside. You've traded the suffocating crush of humanity for the open road. Then the sound comes again, a woo-woo. It cuts through the stillness like a serrated knife. It is not the romantic, lonely howl of a wolf on a moonlit t-shirt. It is a tactical signal. It is a communication between pack members coordinating a perimeter. And you, walking alone on a dirt track with no torch and the smell of fear sweating out of your pores, have just wandered into the kill zone. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that medieval Europe was not the tamed continent we know today. It was a vast, terrifying forest punctuated by tiny islands of human habitation. And this forest belonged to the wolf. In France, Germany, and even England, before they were hunted to extinction there, wolves were a daily, lethal reality. Chronicles from the era are filled with grim statistics. particularly during harsh winters, the Wolf month of January, when packs would grow bold enough to enter villages and dig up fresh graves in the churchyards. You aren't just dealing with a wild animal. You are dealing with a competitor that sees you as slow, soft, and defenseless. You pick up your pace, your boots crunching loudly on the frosted grass. You realize with a jolt of panic that humans are pitifully unequipped for the night. You have no night vision. You have no claws. You have no fur. You are a naked ape stumbling through the domain of apex predators who have evolved specifically to hunt in the dark. You scan the tree line that looms to your left. The trees look like skeletal hands reaching for the sky. In the spaces between the trunks, the darkness is absolute. But then you see it. Two pinpricks of green gold light floating in the blackness. Tapetum lucidum, the reflective layer behind a wolf's retina that allows them to see you clearly while you are squinting at shadows. Then another pair appears, and another. They are pacing you. They aren't attacking yet. They are just escorting you, waiting for you to trip, to stop, or to show weakness. You recall a quirky, fringed tidbit from medieval bestiaries that suddenly feels very relevant. It was widely believed that if a wolf saw you before you saw it, you would instantly lose your voice. This wasn't just a superstition. It was considered a biological fact. The wolf's gaze was thought to steal the power of speech, rendering the victim unable to scream for help. You try to clear your throat, just to check. A croak comes out. You tell yourself it's just the cold air, but the silence of the forest feels heavy, as if the trees themselves are holding their breath to see what happens. You grab a heavy stick from the roadside, swinging it in a pathetic arc. It makes you feel slightly better, but you know that a stick is no match for a 100-pound animal that can crush a femur with its jaws. You are walking a gauntlet. The psychology of the forest at night is totally different from the city. In the city, the danger was human greed, lust, anger. Here, the danger is indifferent. The wolf doesn't hate you. It just needs calories. And you are a walking bag of protein. Historians and biologists still argue about the true extent of the man-eating wolf phenomenon. Some modern ecologists argue that healthy wolves rarely attack humans, and that medieval accounts are exaggerated or conflated with rabid animals. However, historical records like the Beast of Gavaden, though later than the medieval period, it reflects the same fear, and parish records listing victims suggest that when prey was scarce and wars left corpses unburied, wolves developed a taste for human flesh. Standing there, hearing the snapping of a twig just 10 feet away, you are definitely siding with the medieval peasants on this one. The danger is real. You spot a shape ahead in the gloom, a small, thatched structure. A hovel, a shepherd's hut. It looks abandoned, the roof sagging and the door hanging off one hinge, but it has walls. It offers a barrier between you and the eyes in the dark. You sprint the last 50 yards, your heart hammering a frantic rhythm. You hear the rustle of paws accelerating behind you. A pack is closing the gap. You dive through the doorway of the hut and slam the broken door shut, jamming a rotting log against it to hold it in place. A heavy thud impacts the wood from the outside. A snarl. Then the scratching of claws against the timber. They are testing the perimeter. You back away into the center of the hut, clutching your stick, trembling uncontrollably. You are safe from the teeth, for now. The scratching eventually stops, replaced by the fading sound of paws moving on. They have decided you aren't worth the effort of a siege. They will go find a stray sheep or a less fortunate traveler. But as the adrenaline fades, a new sensation takes over. You are standing in a drafty, unheated wooden shack in the middle of the night. You have no fire. You have no cloak, unless you kept the one from the city. You are soaked in sweat, which is now turning to ice on your skin. You realize that while you have escaped the jaws of the wolf, you have walked straight into the arms of the silent killer that claims more lives than any predator. You are entering the deep freeze. In the modern world, we complain if the thermostat drops below 68 degrees. We have central heating, down comforters, and insulated windows. Here, the temperature inside the hut is exactly the same as the temperature outside, freezing. And as the night deepens toward the frantic, coldest hour before dawn, you are about to discover why freezing to death was a very common cause of death on a medieval death certificate. You wrap your arms around yourself, your teeth chattering so hard they ache, and realize that the stone floor you are standing on is a heat sink designed to drain the life right out of you. You slide down the rough wooden wall of the shepherd's hut, your legs finally giving out as the adrenaline leaves your system. The scratching at the door has stopped. The wolves have moved on to easier prey. You are alive. But as you sit there on the packed dirt floor, gasping for breath, you realize that safety is a relative term. You have escaped the teeth, but you are now at the mercy of the temperature. And in the medieval night, the temperature is not just a setting on a thermostat. It is a weapon. The silence in the hut is absolute, save for the wind whistling through the gaps in the wattle and daub walls. You wrap your arms around your chest, trying to preserve whatever body heat you have left, but it feels like trying to hold water in a sieve. The cold here is aggressive. It doesn't just sit around you. It penetrates. It seeps through the soles of your boots, climbs up your legs, and settles deep in your marrow. You are experiencing the reality of a world without insulation, without double glazing, and without central heating. A mainstream historical fact that you are feeling acutely right now is that the medieval period, particularly from the early 14th century onwards, marked the beginning of what climatologists call the Little Ice Age. Global temperatures dropped significantly. Winters became brutal. Rivers like the Thames froze solid enough to hold fares on, and the nights became dangerously frigid. You aren't just cold because it's night. You are cold because you are living through a micro-apocalypse of the climate. The medieval warm period that allowed Vikings to farm in Greenland is over. You are in the freeze. You look around the hut for a source of heat. In the center of the room, there is a circle of blackened stones, a hearth. It is cold and dead, filled with gray ash that hasn't seen a flame in weeks. You have your flint and steel, if the watchman didn't take it. But looking around, you see no dry wood. The floor is bare dirt. The roof is damp thatch. You are sitting in a refrigerator. This lack of fuel isn't just bad luck. It's a reflection of a massive medieval crisis. Wood was the primary fuel for everything cooking, heating, industry, construction. By the 1300s, huge swaths of Europe had been deforested. Firewood was expensive. In cities, the poor often couldn't afford to heat their homes at all, relying on body heat and heavy woolens. In the countryside, peasants had rights to gather fallen branches, estovers, but cutting down a tree in the Lord's forest? That was a crime. You are shivering in a hut because the economics of energy have failed you. You curl up into a ball, tucking your nose into your collar to recycle your own breath. You try to remember the survival trick about alcohol warming you up. You still have the residual buzz from the tavern ale in your system. Surely that helps? Unfortunately, that is a myth. Alcohol causes vasodilation. It widens your blood vessels, bringing warm blood to the surface of your skin. This makes you feel warm temporarily, like a beer jacket, but it actually accelerates heat loss from your core. You are literally venting your life force into the freezing air. The ale is killing you faster. As you sit there, your teeth chattering with a violence that makes your jaw ache, you fantasize about a chimney. You imagine a nice roaring fireplace with a mantelpiece. But here's the thing. In this era, chimneys are a high-tech luxury item, mostly found in manor houses and castles. For the vast majority of people, the chimney is just a hole in the roof. The fire sits in the middle of the room, and the smoke, theoretically, drifts up and out. Historians and architects still argue about the efficiency of this transition. While we assume chimneys are better, some scholars point out that the central open hearth was actually more thermally efficient for a large hall. It radiated heat in 360 degrees, warming the people sitting around it. The chimney, by contrast, sucked a huge amount of hot air up the flue, creating drafts that pulled cold air in from the cracks in the walls. So, strangely enough, when the rich started building chimneys to get rid of the smoke, they often ended up colder than the peasants huddled around their smoky central fires. You, however, have neither smoke nor radiant heat. You just have the drafts. You feel the floor beneath you sapping your warmth. This is the heat sink effect. The earth is infinite. Your body heat is finite. The earth will win. You recall a quirky fringe historical tidbit about how medieval peasants dealt with this. They didn't sleep alone, and they didn't just sleep with humans. In a longhouse arrangement, the family lived at one end and the livestock lived at the other, often separated only by a flimsy partition or a drainage ditch. The body heat of 3 cows and a pig acts as a surprisingly effective biological radiator. It raises the ambient temperature of the house by several degrees. Right now, you would give anything to be spooning a heifer. The smell of manure would be a small price to pay for the feeling of your toes again. Your shivering begins to change. It becomes less violent, more spasmodic. Your movements are sluggish. Your thoughts are moving through molasses. You are entering the early stages of hypothermia. The cold is no longer painful. It's becoming numbing. This is the danger zone. This is where the medieval knight claims the poor wretches found frozen in ditches the next morning. You try to rub your arms to generate friction. The friction burns your skin, which feels like parchment paper. You realize that the darkness inside the hut is somehow colder than the darkness outside. It's a stagnant, tomb-like cold. You need to move. If you fall asleep here, on this cold stone, you won't wake up for the second sleep. You won't wake up at all. You force yourself to stand up. Your knees crack, stiff and painful. You pace the small circumference of the hut, stomping your feet. Stomp, stomp, stomp. The sound is deafening in the silence. It keeps the blood flowing, but it also highlights just how alone you are. The wind outside dies down for a moment. The whistling stops. The silence that follows is profound. It's not the quiet of a library. It's the quiet of a void. And in that void, your brain starved of sensory input, pumped full of fear, and rattled by the cold starts to play tricks on you. Sensory deprivation is a powerful hallucinogen. When the eyes see nothing and the ears hear nothing, the brain invents data to fill the gap. You start to hear things. Not the howl of a wolf this time, but something closer, something inside the room. A rustle in the thatch? A breath in the corner? You stop pacing. You hold your breath. You listen. There it is again. A faint scratching sound, not a rat. It's too rhythmic. SC rich ... SC rich ... scritch. Is it the wind? Is it a loose board? Or is it something else? You remember the stories of the quiet folk, the spirits that inhabit the lonely places. You remember the knockers in the mines and the brownies in the barns, creatures that can be helpful or malicious depending on their mood. But mostly, you remember that in the medieval worldview, silence is rarely empty. Silence is just the space where the invisible things live. You stare into the corner of the hut, your eyes straining against the blackness until they hurt. The cold is forgotten for a moment, replaced by a primal dread of the unknown. You are experiencing the psychological torture of the pre-industrial night. It's not just the temperature that strips you bare. It's the lack of distraction. You are alone with your mind, and your mind is starting to eat itself. And then the sound changes. It's not inside the hut. It's coming from the earth itself. A low, muffled thump, then another. It sounds like a heartbeat buried underground, or dot dot, a shovel hitting dirt. You press your ear to the wall, listening to the outside world. The sound is distinct now. Dig, thump, dig. It's coming from the clearing just beyond the trees. You realize you aren't as alone in the woods as you thought. Someone else is out here in the dead of night. And whoever is digging a hole in the forest at 3 a.m. is probably not planting tulips. You press your ear harder against the rough wood of the shepherd's hut, straining to filter the signal from the noise. Thump, scrape, thump. The sound is rhythmic, persistent, and maddeningly ambiguous. In the daylight, you would instantly identify it as a shovel hitting earth. But here, in the sensory vacuum of the medieval night, your brain refuses to accept the simple explanation. It starts to offer you alternatives, each one more terrifying than the last. Is it a heartbeat? Is it footsteps? Is it something scratching its way out of the ground? You are experiencing the psychological phenomenon known as pareidolia, but for your ears. Just as your eyes see faces in the clouds, your brain is hardwired to find patterns in chaos. And when the visual world is deleted by the darkness, your hearing becomes your primary survival tool. It amplifies everything. The rustle of a mouse in the thatch sounds like a boot step. The groaning of a tree branch sounds like a moan of agony. You are trapped in an echo chamber of your own paranoia. You decide you cannot stay in the hut. The sensory deprivation is worse than the cold. The ambiguity of the sound is eating at your sanity. You need to verify the data. You push the rotting log away from the door and step back out into the freezing night. The air is still, which makes the sounds carry with terrifying clarity. As you step into the clearing, a piercing shriek tears through the air. It sounds like a woman screaming in mortal terror, a high, wavering cry that raises the hair on your arms. You freeze, your heart stopping for a beat. You look around wildly, expecting to see a victim, a ghost, or a demon. But there is nothing there. You have just heard a red fox, or perhaps a barn owl. To the modern naturalist, these are standard nocturnal animal calls. To the medieval peasant, however, these sounds are the literal voices of the supernatural. The barn owl, with its ghostly white face and blood-curdling screech, was known as the corpse bird. If it screeched over your house, it meant someone was going to die. A mainstream historical fact is that the fear of these night noises was so profound that people would actively hunt owls and nail their carcasses to barn doors to ward off the evil they represented. Standing here, listening to that scream fade into the dark, you understand why. It doesn't sound like biology. It sounds like suffering. You force yourself to keep moving, guided by the rhythmic thump-dig sound that is coming from a grove of yew trees further down the track. But the forest isn't done with you yet. A sudden gust of wind rushes through the canopy high above. It sounds like a rushing river, or perhaps like a cavalcade of horses. You look up. The branches are thrashing against the stars. The sound grows louder, a chaotic mix of wind, creaking wood, and rustling leaves. To you, it's a weather front. To a person from 1350, this is the Mesney de Laquin, or the wild hunt. This is one of the most pervasive and terrifying myths of the Middle Ages. Across Europe, people believed that on stormy nights, a spectral army of restless souls, led by a demonic huntsman, sometimes associated with Odin, King Arthur, or the devil himself, would ride through the sky. If you heard them coming, you had to throw yourself face down on the ground and pray. If you looked at them, you would be swept up and forced to ride with them forever. Historians and folklorists still argue about the origins of the Wild Hunt legend. Was it a way to explain the terrifying acoustics of winter storms? Was it a cultural memory of ancient warrior bands? Or was it a psychological manifestation of the collective guilt of a society obsessed with the afterlife? Some scholars suggest that the sound of migrating geese, which sound like barking dogs, Gabriel's hounds, when flying at night, contributed to the myth. As the wind roars over your head, sounding suspiciously like galloping hooves and baying hounds, you decide not to look up. You keep your eyes on the ground. You don't want to be drafted into a ghost army tonight. The wind dies down as quickly as it started, leaving you in a silence that feels even heavier than before. This is the zero noise of the pre-industrial world. In the modern world, there is always a hum traffic, electricity, distant planes. Here, the noise floor is absolute zero. This silence causes a physiological reaction. Your ears literally increase their sensitivity, turning up the gain to find a signal. This leads to a phantom ringing, a tinnitus of the void. You start to hear the blood rushing in your own Eustachian tubes. Whoosh, whoosh. And then, cutting through your own internal noise, the digging sound returns. Clink, metal hitting stone. It's distinctly human. No animal uses a tool like that. The sound is coming from a small walled enclosure just ahead. As you get closer, you see the outline of a lich gate, a roofed gateway, and beyond it, the jagged silhouettes of stone markers leaning at odd angles. A churchyard. Of course, the digging is happening in the graveyard. A quirky fringe historical tidbit you might not know is that medieval churchyards were not the Sama, manicured lawns we have today. They were active community hubs. Markets were held there. Cattle were grazed among the graves to keep the grass down, and people even danced and drank there during festivals, much to the annoyance of the priests. But at night, the churchyard reverted to its primary function, a storage facility for the dead. And the medievals believed the storage wasn't always secure. You hesitate at the gate. The sound is coming from the far side, near the church wall. Scrape, thud, someone is working hard. You creep forward, hiding behind a large yew tree. Yews were planted in graveyards for a reason. They are poisonous to livestock, keeping the cows away from the church walls, and they were symbols of immortality. Right now, it's just a good hiding spot. You peer around the trunk. A lantern is sitting on a mound of fresh earth, casting a harsh, low light. In the pit, a figure is waist deep, shoveling dirt over his shoulder. He pauses, wipes his brow, and takes a swig from a flask. He grunts. "Passing hard clay, this one," a voice says from the shadows above the pit. You jump. There's a second man. He's sitting on a tombstone, keeping watch. He's holding a sack. You have stumbled upon the resurrection men of the Middle Ages. Well, technically that term comes later, but the profession is timeless. These aren't demons. They aren't ghosts. They are grave robbers. And while they might not be supernatural, they are infinitely more dangerous because they are committing a capital crime, and they definitely don't want witnesses. You watch as the man in the pit strikes something hollow. Thud, a wooden coffin lid. He pries it open with a crack that sounds like a gunshot in the silence. The man on the tombstone hops down, eager. They aren't looking for the body. Medical dissection isn't a big industry yet. They are looking for the grave good. You take a deep breath, filling your lungs with the icy, damp air of the churchyard, and you commit to the performance of a lifetime. You don't try to scream like a banshee. That's too human. Instead, You aim for something lower, something guttural and broken, like rocks grinding together deep underground. You summon every ounce of your vocal fry and let out a long drawn-out moan that vibrates in the chest. Then, for good measure, you throw in a little bit of bad Latin you remember from high school or pop culture. EXSURGE ... rasp. Vengeance ... The effect is instantaneous and catastrophic. The lookout on the tombstone doesn't reach for his knife. He reaches for his crucifix. The man in the pit lets out a yelp that is distinctly high-pitched, scrambling backwards so fast he trips over the coffin lid and falls face first into the mud. "Revenant!" the lookout screams. The corpse walker is awake. They don't stick around to check your credentials. They don't wait to see if you are a tangible threat or a trick of the light. Their guilt, combined with the crushing superstition of the era, does all the heavy lifting for you. They abandon their shovel. They abandon the sack. They even abandon the lantern. They sprint toward the lich gate, tripping over headstones, their footsteps fading rapidly into the forest as they flee what they believe is a vengeful spirit rising from purgatory. You stand there for a moment, listening to them crash through the underbrush, feeling a rush of triumphant adrenaline. You have successfully weaponized the medieval worldview against its own inhabitants. But as the silence returns, heavy and suffocating, you realize you are now the only living thing in a graveyard at 3 a.m., standing over an open grave, illuminated by a stolen lantern. You walk slowly toward the pit. The lantern is still burning, casting long, erratic shadows against the walls of the dug-out earth. You look down. The coffin lid is splintered open, revealing the contents. It's not a skeleton. It's a fresh burial. A body wrapped tightly in a white linen shroud, tied at the head and feet. This brings us to the horrifying truth of the title. These men weren't digging for gold rings or buried pirate treasure. They were likely digging for the shroud itself. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that linen was incredibly labor-intensive to produce, and therefore expensive. For a poor family, the burial shroud might represent the most valuable piece of fabric they owned. Grave robbers often called resurrectionists in later centuries, but simply thieves here would dig up the body, strip it naked, and sell the linen to a paper mill or a rag merchant. It was a grim recycling program where the dead subsidized the living. But there is a darker layer to this nocturnal economy. You notice the sack the lookout left behind. You nudge it with your foot. It clinks. You crouch down and open it. Inside, you find a few fragments of bone and a clump of moss. You have just stumbled upon the ingredients for medieval medicine. A quirky fringe historical tidbit that is truly stomach-churning is the widespread practice of corpse medicine. Doctors and apothecaries believed that the human body contained residual life force that could be used to treat the living. Usnea, or skull moss, which grew on the skulls of dead men, preferably those who died violently, was used to stop bleeding. Ground-up human bone was used for ailments of the limbs. And later, in the Renaissance, mumia, powdered mummy flesh would become a panacea for everything from headaches to stomach ulcers. Those robbers weren't just stealing clothes. They were harvesting raw materials for the local pharmacy. You are looking at the dark side of the wellness industry. You step back from the grave, feeling a wave of nausea that has nothing to do with the smell. It's the commodification of the human body that unsettles you. In the medieval night, nothing is wasted, not even you. You sit down on a nearby bench stone slab that is probably a horizontal tombstone and pull the lantern closer. The heat from the flame is meager, but it's the first warmth you've felt in hours. You hold your hands over the glass, watching the light flicker. The shadows of the yew trees stretch and contract, looking like grasping fingers. As you sit there, you start to think about why those men ran so fast. They called you a revenant. This isn't just a fancy word for ghost. In medieval folklore, a revenant, from the Latin reveniens, returning, was a reanimated corpse that physically climbed out of its grave to harass the living. Unlike a ghost, which is a spirit, a revenant is a walking, rotting body. They were believed to spread disease, kill livestock, and assault their surviving family members. Historians still argue about the relationship between these folk beliefs and the official teachings of the Church. The Church taught that the soul went to heaven, hell, or purgatory, and the body stayed put until Judgment Day. The idea of a walking corpse was technically heretical. Yet, strictly theological records are full of accounts, like those by the 12th century chronicler, William of Newburgh, describing villagers digging up suspected revenants, chopping them into pieces, and burning them to stop the hauntings. It suggests a massive disconnect between what the priests said in the daylight and what the people believed in the dark. The vampire myth didn't start in Victorian London. It started here, in the mud of the churchyard, born from the fear of the undecayed body. You look at the open grave again. You half expect the shrouded figure to sit up. You tell yourself that's impossible. You tell yourself it's just biology. But in the silence of the night, with the wind rustling the yew branches, biology feels like a weak shield against 3,000 years of superstition. You are exhausted. The adrenaline crash is hitting you hard now. Your eyelids feel heavy. The cold is creeping back in, bypassing the warmth of the lantern. You know you should keep moving, find better shelter, but your body refuses to cooperate. You are at the absolute nadir of the night. This is the hour of the wolf, the hour of death, the hour when the human spirit is at its lowest ebb. You lean your head against the cold stone of the church wall. You just want it to be over. You want the sun. You want the noise. You want the terrible, smelly, dangerous day to return, because at least the day is visible. And then, just as you think you might freeze to death right there in the churchyard, a sound cuts through the air. It's not a scream. It's not a howl. It is a man-made, mechanical, beautiful sound. Clang. It comes from the bell tower directly above your head, vibrating through the stone and rattling your teeth. Clang. It is the prime bell, the Angelus, the wake-up call. You open your eyes. The sky to the east is no longer pitch black. There is a bruise of purple on the horizon. The absolute tyranny of the darkness is breaking. The night is over. But as you will soon see, the relief of the morning is just a different kind of suffering. The bell isn't inviting you to a leisurely breakfast. It is commanding you to start the grind all over again. The bell in the tower above you continues to toll, a relentless, deafening rhythm that shatters the fragile peace of the pre-dawn silence. Clang, clang. It is the Angelus, or perhaps the bell for prime, the first hour of the monastic day. To the monks inside, it is a call to prayer. To you, shivering in the churchyard with a stolen lantern and a head full of adrenaline, it is the factory whistle of the Middle Ages. You stumble out of the lich gate, leaving the open grave and the fled robbers behind. You expect to see the sun bursting over the horizon, a glorious golden reward for surviving the night. But you don't. The sky is a bruised, muddy purple, barely lighter than the ground. It is still technically dark. Yet, as you look down the road leading back to the village or the city gates, you see movement. The world is waking up, not because it wants to, but because it has to. Shadowy figures are emerging from the hovels and cottages. They move with the heavy, plodding gait of people who are perpetually exhausted. They are carrying tool scythes, rakes, baskets for the market. No one is speaking. There is no cheerful, good morning. The energy required for conversation is being conserved for the labor ahead. You realize that the night didn't end when you felt rested. It ended when the bell told you it was time to work. A mainstream historical fact that often gets lost in the romanticized view of knights and castles is the sheer brutality of the medieval workday. For an agricultural laborer, the day began at twilight and ended at twilight. In the summer, that could mean a 16-hour shift of back-breaking physical exertion. You are looking at a workforce that runs on a caloric deficit, fueled by pottage, a thick, grain-based stew, and weak ale. The concept of sleeping in is biologically impossible for them. If they don't work, they don't eat. You join the stream of people heading toward the fields. You feel like an imposter in your strange clothes or the rags you traded for, but no one looks at you. They are too tired to care. They are sleepwalking in the literal sense, their bodies moving on muscle memory while their minds slowly boot up. You notice a man walking near you, rubbing his eyes with soil-stained hands. He looks to be about 40, but his face is weathered into a map of deep crevices that makes him look 60. This is the laborer's groan, made manifest. His spine is curved from years of bending over a plow. His knuckles are swollen. The night offered him a brief respite, a few hours on a straw mattress with the fleas, and now the machine of feudalism demands his body again. Historians and economists still argue fiercely about the quality of life for the medieval peasant. There is a popular theory, often cited on the internet, that medieval peasants actually worked less than modern Americans because of the sheer number of saints' days and religious holidays, up to 80 days a year. However, other scholars push back, noting that holiday didn't always mean day off. It often meant mandatory church attendance, unpaid labor for the Lord, corvée, or simply that you had to do your own household chores, preparing the thatch, mending tools, processing wool instead of field work. Standing here in the freezing dawn, watching the steam rise from the breath of the crowd, you suspect the leisurely peasant theory might be a bit optimistic. As the light strengthens, turning the sky from purple to a cold steel gray, the terrors of the night begin to recede. The wolves have retreated to the deep woods. The cutpurses have slunk back into the shadows of the city alleys. The grave robbers are likely counting their takings in a hidden cellar. The supernatural monsters, the incubus, the wild hunt, the revenants dissolve into the mist. But they are replaced by the visible dangers of the day. You see the bailiff riding up on his horse, checking to make sure everyone is present. You see the sheer scale of the fields that need to be plowed by hand. You see the smoke rising from the Lord's manor, a reminder of the hierarchy that keeps you in the mud while others sleep on feather beds. You realize that the night was terrifying because it was chaotic, unknown, and lawless. But the day is terrifying for the opposite reason. It is perfectly ordered. It is a cage of obligation. The darkness hid you, the light exposes you. You reach the edge of the field. The overseer points to a furrow. He hands you a tool, perhaps a heavy hoe. He doesn't ask for your resume. If you have hands, you are hired. You grip the rough wood handle. The blisters from the candle, the scratches from the forest, and the bruises from the city streets all flare up in protest. You look at the horizon one last time. The sun finally breaches the tree line, a blinding white disk that offers no warmth, only illumination. The bell tolls one final time, signaling the start of prime. The man next to you spits on his hands, grips his plow, and drives it into the earth with a grunt of effort. You mimic him. You strike the ground. The night is over. The survival horror is finished. The simulation of the Dark Ages has run its course. You have faced the void and lived. But as you swing the hoe, you realize that for the people who actually lived this life, there was no end of script. There was only the cycle. The bell rings, the sun rises, the sun sets, the darkness returns. You drop the hoe. You step out of the line. The scene around you begins to blur, the sounds of the iron tools hitting the earth fading into a low hum. The cold air softens. The smell of the earth and the unwashed bodies dissipates. You are drifting away from the 14th century, pulling back through the layers of time, leaving the ghosts and the laborers to their eternal grind.